Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining this LANSA webinar introducing LANSA Composer 7. My name is Yad Jora and I look after marketing for LANSA in Europe. And along with my colleague Eugene King, we'll run you through an introduction to LANSA Composer, including a demonstration of all its capabilities. If you have any questions as we go through the session, please tap them into the Q&A panel and we'll get to those and pick them up at the end. So without further ado, let's kick off. Let's take a look at a traditional enterprise company. In order to keep data moving freely through their various systems, which may be a combination of custom and off-the-shelf solutions, they need to communicate in a variety of ways. For example, they may have remote point-of-sale systems that upload sales data to the ERP via Excel spreadsheets on a nightly basis. Their top supplier may use traditional EDI documents to exchange order information. They may have partners that require XML feeds every 30 minutes to relay inventory information back and forth between systems. And they may have outsourced e-commerce systems that use RESTful web services to communicate order information and sync up customer data. Then as the company grows, so does its integration needs. Suddenly, they may have found themselves having to create more and more integrations to handle the additional load and to satisfy all their various integration requirements. Now, your company may or may not look like this, but I think we can all agree that at some point, this method is going to no longer make economic sense. When it comes to business data and the processes that handle it, there's still a lot of data being moved manually. We're about to enter the year 2020, and there are still a huge number of companies operating legacy and manual processes. And here are just a few examples. It's the case that 17 billion faxes are still sent out every year by organizations and individuals across the globe. A 2017 survey by Wakefield and Concur found that 84% of small businesses still rely heavily on manual processes. IDC did a study that found that 43% of workers say they often have to cut and paste or rekey information between systems. And in that same study, 77% of line of business leaders say the gaps in automating their existing systems and the lack of integration between them adversely impact the quality of the customer experience they can provide. Again, that IDC survey says that 81% of line of business leaders described having to work in digital silos where data is spread across multiple systems and workers must undertake a series of separate manual activities to gather the information they need to do their work. As a result, they say, these high-value business-critical processes are fragile, error-prone, and fraught with risk. What all this adds up to is that all of these manual and inefficient processes that are not integrated with core systems are causing companies to start looking at tools that will help automate those processes to achieve better efficiencies and increase the quality and speed at which they do their business. LANSA Composer is a no-code business process integration suite, which means you don't have to be a developer to use it, that's designed to cover many integration and process improvement requirements that most business processes have today. It allows for simple and easy exchange and conversion of data, where the end-to-end process is fully managed. It streamlines how the data is exchanged, processed, and monitored between internal systems, external trading partners, and the cloud. So let's quickly review the main components of LANSA Composer, as Eugene will cover all of these areas in his demonstration. The trading partner is the entity that's going to take part in the data movement and transformation process. It can be a system, local or remote, perhaps part of a supply chain, could be a system from one of your customers or suppliers. LANSA Composer allows you to define everything about your trading partner, from physical addresses to email addresses, access information, linked systems, order information, and a lot more. To get data to and from a trading partner, you can set up many different types of the communications that you want to use, whether it's FTP, HTTP, SMTP, and POP3 for sending and receiving email, message brokers, or connections to remote database servers. You can set up the transportation options in the way that you choose. The transformation element allows you to create all of the different data transformations or data mappings to convert your data from one format to another. It uses a graphical drag and drop designer that's completely point and click. And if traditional EDI is a requirement for you, we've preloaded a whole bunch of different Edifact and X12 maps for you to use. Orchestration is the element that manages the process flow. So LANSA Composer also provides a process sequencer. You can use that to orchestrate your new processes to streamline and automate them. Since this is a code-free solution, business analysts or power users can orchestrate their own business processes without having to rely on developers and without having to be a coder. Last but not least, there's also the operations console, which provides administrators with visibility into their LANSA Composer processes. There they'll have the ability to drill down into every step of any transaction to see what did or didn't finish successfully, diagnose what happened, and restart the processes if they need to. So there you have it. Those are the main components of LANSA Composer. Now, lots of companies use Composer to manage the data for major processes across their largest systems, such as their ERP. However, there's also the possibility to use Composer to automate simpler processes too. We wanted to showcase how you can do that, so here are a few examples. Firstly, emailing customer requests for information. Let's say, for example, a customer sends an email with the appropriate subject and content. LANSA Composer monitors the inbox and retrieves that email. And then based on the subject and content, Composer will process and respond to the email with the appropriate information via email or SMS. So let's say, as an example, the customer sends an email asking for current account information, and the subject includes their account number. LANSA Composer validates the from address by matching it to the account number. The account number is used to retrieve relevant account information, and the response to the user is sent via email or SMS. Number 2, keeping multiple databases in sync. When data is updated in one database, a LANSA Composer process is triggered. This process copies the updated or new data to one or more application databases, including Salesforce, SAP, Microsoft Dynamics, NetSuite, and many other bespoke systems. Composer can be used to automatically send personalized emails. These emails could contain order confirmations for customers, account information such as account balances, expected delivery dates and times, and it can be used to integrate third-party logistics technologies for accurate tracking information, so it could be used to send product information such as stock availability. Number 4 is monitoring a directory for incoming documents. Composer will monitor a specific directory for inbound documents, and once that document is received, the document type could be used to decide exactly what to do with it. So let's say, for example, suppliers need to have the ability to update the information on their products on an e-commerce web portal. Composer can monitor a directory for uploaded documents that a supplier is providing, and when one is detected, the process determines the document type. Different processes could then be started based on that document type. So for example, if it's an image, that image could be moved to the appropriate directory on a website to update the product image on the web page. If it's an Excel spreadsheet, including product data, that data could be retrieved and written to a database. And finally, reporting, including scheduling, creating and printing and emailing of reports, creating CSV files for a one-time report requested by an Excel user perhaps, converting IBM spool files to CSV and PDF formats, or processing web visit logs into a database for reporting. So this is where I'll pass control over to Eugene so that he can demonstrate LANSA Composer and how it can act as that single solution for handling all of your internal and external communications and integration needs. And he'll show some of the examples that we've just discussed. So with that, Eugene, over to you.
Thanks, Shad. For this demonstration, I will take the first use case, which is the information request by email, and look at how we can achieve this using LANSA Composer. Now, in the overall process, we're going to be using the from address to validate the accounts and to validate the customer information and retrieve the customer information from our database. The subject of the email will be used to indicate the type of inquiry. We're going to have two types of inquiries for this demo initially, which is the product details and account information. So for product details, we'll have the account, we'll have the product ID for the subject, and for account information, we'll just simply have information in the subject. When the inquiry is made, we will then respond via email. This could quite easily be SMS, but for this particular demo, we're going to be looking at an email return. And specifically for the account information, we will also send back a order history, which will be in the format of a CSV file. Okay, so how are we going to achieve this? So there's different areas that we need to look at. The first is, how do we get the data? So this is how we move data from point A to point B so that we can actually process that. Now, just as a side note, transport is an example of an activity. An activity can be anything from using your file transfers to sending emails, to looking at directories, to concatenating, to accessing databases directly using SQL. So they're all different types of activities. But for this demo, we'll be looking specifically at the transport. And as you can see there, we support all of the industry standards, as Yad has mentioned previously, but we also have an open architecture so that if there's a mechanism that you use and specifically for your organization, we can incorporate that within LANSA Composer and use that transport mechanism. So let's have a look and see what that looks like in LANSA Composer. So I'm going to bring up the console. So this is the main console. So this is what we call the LANSA client. This is the interface with the server side. But this allows me to monitor and look at everything that I'm going to be doing as part of a composer developer as such. So the first area I want to look at is going to be the activities. So in here, we have a wide variety of different types of activities. So there's over 100 different activities out of the box. It allows us to do file management, allows us to manipulate processes, call additional processes, whether we're designing and debugging. But the ones we're interested here are the emails. So here we see the different types. So we've got mail receive and we've got mail send. And you see we've also got the SMS messages as well. So as long as you've got a subscription, you can send out SMS messages. Let's take a quick look at the receive activity. And when I select the receive activity, we then see the details of that activity. We'll also, if I go onto the parameters, we'll also see what parameters are required. So here we can see that there's only one required parameter, and that is a configuration. So for the configuration, I need to look at a separate section. So in this case, it's POP3. And let's have a look at the POP3. So this is an example of a POP3 configuration. And what this contains are all the required user profiles, credentials, and server names to allow me to access my email box. So in this case, I have an email profile called lansa.presales@gmail.com. And any emails which arrive in there, I am going to process. And it also tells me what directory is going to be stored in. If I want to see where this configuration is being used, we have this cross-reference. And you'll see that with all these objects as well, we have this audit, so we can see who made the change and when they made the change thing. And if we go back to the activity one again, you'll see that we've got the same functionality here. We have the audit and the cross-reference. So this actually helps with change control. If I want to make a change to this particular activity or a configuration, I can look at where it's being used. I can then go in and use that as an impact list to then make appropriate changes. Again, with a lot of our objects, we have the run history. So I can look at when it's been used and by what process this particular activity has been used. So we can see here, it's been extensively used by this process called LCD_email_ENQ, which is the email inquiry function. Okay. So let's just quickly review what we've seen. So what we actually looked at was transport, but that's just an example of an activity. And there are many of these activities shipped out of the box. In fact, it's very rarely that you have to go in and create your own activity. But if you do need to, then you can do, whether that's transport, whether that's specific functionality associated with your backend system, you can create that. It's fully configurable and parameter driven, which means that you can use a single activity across multiple processes. So there's no hard coding in there. We can soft code it and we can run it. It's very, very versatile. And as you had mentioned, there's no programming required for these activities. They're out of the box. We just have to plug in the appropriate parameters and plug in the appropriate configuration. And to help with change control, and you'll see this across all of the various elements, we have this cross-reference and we have the audit trail capability. So now that we've got the data, what do we actually do with that data? Well, we need to get it into a format which is usable by our organization, or that we can actually process. So whether it's coming in as a CSV or a text or an XML or an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's coming in as one of the traditional EDIs, X12, Tradicoms, or Edifact, we can take that and we can then manipulate it and put it into different databases. Or we can access databases directly and vice versa. You know, we can do it in the reverse format. And as part of the added value, we can convert the data. So if we're getting an order with a US date format, we may want to put it in European format. So before we put it into our database, we allow that data conversion, and we can enrich it and look and do particular lookups. And you'll see an example of that in the actual demonstration itself in a second, where we do a lookup to retrieve specific pieces of information. Right, let's pull up the console again. This time, we want to look at the transformation. Okay, so here's our list of transformation maps. So let's just pull this one up here that we see. There we go. And again, you can see the various properties. So this is the one they're going to be using in the actual demonstration. We have various properties. We have parameters. So what parameters is this map expecting? So we need to tell it what database to connect to. We need to pass in an account ID and also a file name to be used when we create a specific file. Now, some of the maps can become very complex, especially when you're dealing with EDI, like the Tradicoms and the X12. They get sort of like a spider's web, so it's very hard to see what element maps to what element. Yeah, so what from the target to the from the source to the target. So here we have a textual view of the same map, so we can quite easily here look at the various elements and the database columns and see what it's being mapped to on the corresponding target. Again, we have run history, so I can see when it was run by what process. And with the maps, we have this version history. And what this allows me to do, if I make an edit to a map and I break it, I can do a rollback and roll it back to a previous version. So I can undo those changes. So it allows me that flexibility, and it keeps that history of the different versions of the map that are available. And we've also got the cross-reference. So if I need to make a change to the map, I then can look at each of these processes, and which is what you're seeing here, these processes that actually use that map. Right, let's take a look at the map itself. So here we have our map. On the left-hand side, we have all of the functions which are available during the mapping process. So think of Excel and the type of functions. So if I need to do a substring, for example, we have a number of substring. If I need to do a multiply, we've got all of those that are actually available for us. So it allows us the flexibility of building that map graphically. So in the actual map itself, so the one I've just highlighted, the LANSA Sales 2, that's a database. And that's a local database. So that's an SQL database that I'm using. And there's the table, which is the order header. On the right-hand side, now highlighted, we have the text file. So that's just a simple CSV file, which I'm going to be writing the details to. So a very simple file. I have a number of columns on that file, and I just write it to that. I've already gone through some of the processes, but this is an incomplete map. So what I need to do first is to pass in the account number. And for that, I do a right click on the map, insert input, and we'll give it a name, and this is going to be the account ID, which is going to be passed to this map from the process. For testing purposes, I'm going to stick in LANSA and just do that there. Okay. So there's my input. But now what I need to do is to look up in the order header and retrieve all the information associated with that account. And to do that, I insert an SQL function. I'm going to tell it what table to access, which is the order header. It then prompts up, okay, well, tell me what you want to match on. So this is going to be the LTC cust ID. And I want to match that to that input variable you just saw me create, which is account ID. Okay. And the results, so for every match, I want to create a row in the CSV file. I then attach the account ID. And as you can see, I'm just dragging and dropping. There's no programming involved in this. I'm just dragging and dropping and linking the various elements. So a couple of elements I need left to link. One is the order number, and the other one is the order total. Just like that. I can save that map now. And then I can run a test. And there we go. There's all of the information associated for LANSA. Okay. So that completes the map. So let's just return quickly and review what we've just seen. So we've seen how we can take the data, how we can transform it, whether we can retrieve it from a database table or from XML file or a CSV file and transform it into a format which is usable by ourselves. We show an example of the file lookup where we use an inputted account ID and bring back the account information. And that's part of the validation process. We can validate that account ID against what's available inside our order header information. We can convert data. Typical example of that is different date formats. We have a text-based view of mappings. And for simple maps, you wouldn't really use that. But for the more complex EDI maps, then it becomes invaluable to be able to quickly track down where you may have problems in the map. And again, we have that cross-referencing, and we have this versioning. So it allows us, if we've made a change to a map and it's broken the map or something's gone wrong, we can always roll back to a previous version. So we've seen how we get the data. We've seen what we do, how we get that data into a format that is usable by our organization. Now we need to look at how we can put those together, how we can combine those activities into a workflow, into a process. And to do that, what we need to do is we need to analyze the process and break it down into simple step-by-step instructions. And we'll see that in a minute. We have these ideas of trading partners. Now, these can be sources of information, whether they're internal or external. They don't have to be external trading partners. It could be internal systems. We can do conditional processing. Yeah, and I'll show you an example of that when we get on to the actual demonstration. If you've got a large production run, you can take that production run, that process, and processing those files, and we can split it up, and we can run multiple ones in parallel at the same time. So it reduces the amount of time taken for running those large processes. We have inbuilt error handling built inside the console itself, but also in regards to what we do with errors as part of an overall process. So let's go back to the first use case of sending the email. So the customer is going to send an email. So the first thing we need to do is to get that email. And in this case, I have an email box set up, as I mentioned, which is lansa.presales@gmail.com. And I need to retrieve that using my get email activity using the configuration you can see on the right-hand side. Once I've got that, I need to check. So this is where the conditional processing comes in. I need to check what the request type is. So based on the subject, so if it's the product code, I'm going to call another process that handles the product inquiries. If it's information for account inquiry, then I'm going to call a process which handles the account inquiry information. Once it's done that, I'm going to then check for more emails. So it's an iterative process, and I can keep that running, checking for inbound emails and handling them as they come in. For this demo, I'm going to be focusing on the account inquiry. So let's take a look and see what we do with that one. Let's break that down. So there we have our initial master process, our control process, and that's going to call the account inquiry process. The first thing we need to do is to get account information, and that's part of the validation. So that uses an SQL activity to access a database with the email address and validate and retrieve all relevant account information. Once that's been done, I'm just going to create a temporary holding file to hold the information which is produced by the map. So this is the map that you saw me create. Once that's been done, I'm going to create the body of the email text based on the parameters which have been defined in the actual process. So you'll see when we take a look at this process, you'll see the parameters account ID, account name, credit limit, current balance. They're all defined. And with the percentage, that part that's enclosed tells the composer that you want to merge those variables into that email text. That will then be used to create the outbound email. And again, we have an outbound email configuration. This tells me what email server to use to send that email. In this case, it'll be sent with an attachment. And once that's been done, we can go back to the controlling process to process the next email. Let's take a look at that in a little bit more detail. So let's go back to the console. And let's go on to processing sequences. So here's my master process. So you can see this one here. This is my master process. And again, we have version history. So this shows me who's made the change and when that change was actually made. And again, cross-referencing, what is it used by and what does it use? So I can see that this uses a number of different activities and a number of different processes. So we can track that down. For this one, I'm just going to quickly go run. So this allows me, because I'm on the workbench, I can run these processes directly, but normally I'd have a job scheduler and I would schedule these jobs to run at specific intervals or to run continuously. Yeah, and just keep checking that email box to see if anything is there. For this one, I'm going to submit to batch, but I could run it immediately, but I'm going to just submit that one to batch and close that down. Let's take a look at the account inquiry process. So I'm going to pull that one up here. So on the left-hand side, we have all of our, what we call a directives palette. So these are the various controls that control the process. So we have case statements, we have loops, and we have if. We've got activities and we've got catches for catching errors. So the first thing we need to do is to validate the user account. And we do that using the from address. So one thing I didn't show you there is that this particular process requires 3 parameters. It's actually one inbound parameter is required, one inbound is optional, and the other outbound is just the status outbound. But the required one is the subject, and the optional is the from address. Okay, but either way, we get that information into the process. So using the from address, I then go, right, let's do a quick lookup. And then the values which are returned are, if you remember the email skeleton that we have the account name, the account ID, credit balance, current, and default discounts. So this is this process which actually returns that. So if it's valid, it'll return that information. If it's not, it'll be blank and it'll indicate that there's been an error. Simple logging of the account name here so that we can see it in our logs, and you'll see that in a second. And then I do a little bit of manipulation to create the file name. So I generate a unique number and then do a concat to then create this string, which indicates the file name, which is the list order headers. Then I do my transformation. So the first thing I need to do, if you remember when I showed you the map, we had 3 input parameters. The first is what database I'm connecting it to. So if I just press the prompt, I can list all the database connectors that I've currently got defined, and I select the one that I actually want. Then we have the account ID, which is being input. So that's retrieved from that first call, which validates the account information. And I'm going to write all of the orders to this file that's been defined for the list order headers. Okay, once that's been done, I do the text substitute. So that takes that text skeleton that you saw and creates a holding file. So that's what this one is here. This is just a holding file to hold the information ready for me to do a mail send. Mail send, again, we've got the information available. So this is the message information and the server information. What server am I connecting to send the message? Where am I sending it to? In this case, it's the from address. So that's who's it going back to. And then from the from address in the actual email itself, I'm just putting in some information. Okay. And then finally, I check to make sure that I've been able to send it. If I've been able to send the email, then the next thing I want to do is delete the actual file itself. So I don't want to save the file. I could move the file into an archive directory, but in this case, I'm doing a direct delete. If I fail to delete it, all I'm going to do is just catch it. So this allows me to catch it without the process ending, and then it'll continue on to doing the processing. But I could have some additional processing down at the bottom, which indicates what is actually going on. Okay, so I'm going to return back to the console now. If we look at our run history, we'll see that the time here, well, this one is 11:10. This is one that's just been run. I can view the log for that. And we've gone through the process 6 times. So here we go. We're doing the mail receive. So I can drill down into this log to show as much information as I want. So here we can see all the various parameters that have been set and what's being passed. We can look that this is the particular product code that is being queried about. And I can drill down into each of those. And you'll see that we've got a green tick, which means that that's fine. But what we'd really be looking for is anything that's red, a red X. Yeah, and that would indicate that there's been an error. So we can use this management by exception and only highlight those areas which need to be addressed and let the processes themselves execute. So what that process actually done is now sent me a couple of emails. So here's let me just open one of those up for you. So here's the product inquiry. So dear LANSA March, you recently requested detailed information about one of our products. Please find the details below. And we have the product code, we have the price, and then we have various descriptions and various features. So that's the product code inquiry. And then for the account information, again, we've reiterated all the account information there, but we've also included a CSV file, which contains all of the account information for the orders. So all the orders, number of products, and so on and so forth. So we sent that through fairly quickly. I'm not going to save that one. So let's just summarize what you've seen so far. So what we showed you is the orchestration tool. So this is where we can create our process sequences. And we can do that just by simply dragging and dropping the various activities and directives and parameters from the palettes on the left-hand side of the screen. One of the first stages we need to do when we look at this orchestration is to break down the overall process into a step-by-step set of instructions. Okay, as you saw in the actual demonstration. And whether you're going to do conditional processing or whether you want to break down these large processes, you can do. We have inbuilt error handling, and we'll see a little bit more of that in a second when we go on to the admin side of things. And again, we have this cross-referencing, and like with maps, we have the versioning. So if I make a change to a process, if I break it, I can always roll it back to the previous version. So the final area that I want to look at is the administration side. So we've looked at we've looked at all the various stages of creating these processes, but what do we do when we go wrong? Yeah, how can we deal with errors within inside the process? And this is where we come into the administration. We've got full administration built within inside LANSA Composer. We can control user access to the environment. So I came in as a super user into the console, but you could restrict certain users to only be able to view processes or view maps and not allow them to actually change. We have multi-tier logging. So we have the high-level logging view, but then as if you've had a problem, we can drill down all the way down to the technical view of the log. So if there's an error, we can look at the traces which are produced automatically as part of that process. And that's what the technical team would actually look at. We have the ability to restart processes that fail. And again, I'll show you that in an actual second. Full audit trails. So you'll see who made changes and when they made the changes to each of the various components. And we have a dashboard which gives you a high-level view of the operational side of Composer and allows you to manage and even execute processes from a web page. Let's go back to the client. So just quickly to show you, in the housekeeping section, we have these event handlers. And these event handlers allow me to set up different events based on actions within inside Composer. So if I have an FTP failure, what'll happen is that the technical team, I can set this up to send it to the technical team, will need to automatically get this email response highlighting that there's been an error with the FTP. And likewise, it's the same with the SMTP as well. So I have a number of those. So there's my SMTP failed. But I have a number of those available, and I can create my own. And I can actually trigger those from within inside a process as well. So it's very flexible with regards to doing the error testing. Right, so let's go and now look at our process monitor. So this process monitor shows me all of the processes that we've run and have been running. And here we can instantly see that we've got a couple of errors. We'll address those in a second. But what I want to show you there is that we can instantly see where there's a problem. And this is where we come in through that management by exception. We don't care about the OK. The only ones we're really interested in are the ones that have actually had errors. But I'll address those when we get onto the web side of the actual console itself. There's a load more of inbuilt admin functions, but I'm just going to now quickly go into the management console. So let's pull the management console up. There we go. So this is the web-based management console. So you don't need the client for this. So you can access this on your phone, on your tablet, or directly on a desktop like I'm doing here. We can monitor the performance. So let's have a look at my performance side. So here we now see the performance information. So we can see today and yesterday and Monday that we run various numbers of different processes. I can take an overall view. So this now shows me the bar charts. It shows me a line chart. But the one that's interesting is this one here, which is the text breakdown. And it shows me today I've run 65 processes. 63 of them have ended okay, of them have ended in error. The average execute time is 22.86 milliseconds. The median is 0.547 milliseconds. Yeah, and you can see that we've got some processes which take a little time to run. Let's have a look at some of those processes. So we can have a look at the throughput monitor. And I'm just going to quickly apply some changes to that. Let's apply those filters. So we can now look at the processes which have been run today. So this move function is an example that Yad mentioned previously, where we're just looking for files in a specific directory. And depending on what those file types are, we will then process them in a different way. We see that we've got a process here, which is LCD orders in 1C. And we've got the 3 version, and there's the process that I've just run itself. I can then drill down into those like that, and I can see where the processes are. Let's just quickly go back to that. In fact, what we'll do is go into the process monitor. So this is now the process monitor. And what we see here is an overview of all the processes which have been run and the ones that have ended in error. So here we can see that this particular process process itself ended in error. If I double click, it brings up the information. Now I happen to know what this error is, and what caused it was that my main server was down. So it was unable to connect to that server. So I can see that that's the problem. I've rectified that problem. So now you'll see that I've got an icon up here, which I've just highlighted, which is a restart. And I'm going to restart that actual process itself. So I've hit refresh, and now we'll see that actual process. So this is the process here. So that's the other one that had failed, as succeeded. Yeah, if I double click on that one to pull up the log for that, we'll see this is the part where it failed, and then it's then picked up and continued on processing the actual files which it's found. So it allows me to recover that remotely via the web by the web interface. Okay, so let's jump back now to the summary. So just to summarize then with the administration side is that we can set up and control user access to the console itself. We can monitor the process, and we can monitor it and manage these by exception. So anything that goes wrong, we can instantly be alerted to, and we can then go in and we can correct what the problem is and then continue the process if necessary. We have web access to the console, to a dashboard, which allows us to view any bottlenecks in the system. So if there's a particular process that's taking up all of the resources, we can see what that is and maybe look at redesigning that process itself to run a bit more streamlined. We have multi-tiered logging. So that means we can have the high level view. So if everything finishes okay, all we want is a simple completion message. But if we need to, we can then drill down all the way to the technical logging information if there's been a problem. We can take a process which has failed and restart it. So it could be that makes sense for some processes, but others we may want to automatically detect any errors, put that down as an exception, move it to the one side and continue processing. Again, it's up to you on how you design those processes. And again, with everything else, we have full audit trail, and we have the ability to do housekeeping to clean up the logs. We don't want to save all of the logs available. Maybe we only want to save the error logs for the last 6 months or so. And we can set that up as part of the housekeeping. So that concludes the demonstration. But before I hand back to Yad, let me just summarize what you've seen in the demo. So I showed you how you can quickly and easily set up communication channels to transport data between systems and trading partners. Yep, so that's internal and external. And that's using a number of the different shipped activities and configurations. So you can set those configurations to connect to your own servers. I've shown you how you can create data transformations or data mappings using a graphical drag and drop designer that's completely point and click. We've then taken those two components and we've created a process sequence using the orchestration tool. And since this is a code-free solution, then business analysts can create their own business processes. You don't need any programmers to do this. And finally, I showed you the operations console that provides the visibility into the LANSA Composer process environment. I'll now hand you back to Yad for a few closing slides and to cover the next steps before opening the floor for questions. Yad, over to you.
Thanks, Eugene. That was a great demo. Really helped to illustrate all the points we've been talking about. So to sum up, if Composer is of interest to you, you can find out more by downloading this white paper on process integration from our website. It includes quite a number of tips on business process integration success, and also references some customer case studies, from many of our Composer implementations around the world. If you have any trouble accessing it from the website, you can always email me directly and I'll be happy to send you a PDF copy. My email address is coming up in a moment. So as a next step, many of our customers engage with us in an initial pilot project, and this is where you can use the software and test it in your own environment with your own data. The first thing to do is to decide what server you'd like the system to run on. This can either be an IBM i or a Windows server. In either case, all the mapping and orchestration is carried out on a Windows PC. Secondly, you need to choose an appropriate trading partner or partners for the pilot project. And then we can start planning the resources or effort required for the pilot. The most important consideration is the time that you have available to evaluate, which obviously you want to keep to a minimum. And this is where we can help. So a typical pilot might take a couple of days of your time, possibly spread over a couple of weeks, plus any testing that you might want to do, and a few days of a LANSA consultant such as Eugene. And of course, this can vary depending on requirements. At the moment, we are running a special 80% off the first year subscription price for new customers of LANSA Composer up until the end of March 2020. And the reason that we're doing this is that we really want to make available Composer to new customers to try out in new ways. As I said before, very often Composer has been used for heavy duty data exchange and conversion requirements, particularly to do with things like EDI and ERP data transformations. But as Eugene has showed in the demo, we can use it for a whole range of much simpler processes that you also might want to automate. So to make it really easy for you to try it, we've implemented this special one-time 80% off promotional price up until the end of March 2020, and would really love you to take advantage of it, see what you can do with LANSA Composer. So finally, here are some of the steps that might need to be undertaken through a typical pilot. We'd naturally seek to understand your requirements by visiting you before the pilot begins. We'll install Composer on the server of your choice and install the mapping and orchestration tools on your PC. Mapping will involve agreeing on standards such as XML schemas and data formats. Typical messages are purchase orders, order confirmations, advanced shipping notes and credit notes. We'll do the mapping for you in the first instance and train you how to do them for the future. Many of the steps, like setting up the trading partners and deploying the solution to live, can be done by us remotely from our offices. You'll be responsible for the testing, and we'll develop the pilot solution for you and then come on-site to train you in all aspects of Composer maintenance and setup. We'll then offer ongoing support where we can assist you remotely if you have any issues. So finally, I'd just like to thank you all for taking the time to join us on the webinar today. We do have some time for answering questions, so if there are any questions that have come in through the Q&A panel, we'll deal with them now. I also just want to remind you of this special promotion that we're offering until the end of March 2020 for 80% off first year subscription price for new customers of LANSA Composer. All right, Eugene, we've had a few questions come in. Here's the first one. The question is, can you call RESTful services as part of a business process?
Short answer, yes. You have the ability to call RESTful services from a sequence. Actually, you have the ability to call many other types of programs too. But yes, RESTful APIs are supported.
Great, thank you. Here's another. What happens when there is a processing error?
So as you saw in the demo, error handling is actually built in to a process sequence. So when an error occurs, you can drop the item into a different sequence flow based upon the error type, and the appropriate people will be notified to take the action. Now, the batch doesn't have to stop. As you saw, we restarted a process as part of that demo, but you could decide to continue on processing if there's an error. Yeah, and you could just put the bad ones into a different process flow.
Great, thank you, Eugene. There's one final one. Is Composer and Visual LANSA compatible?
Yes, it is. You can call LANSA Composer processes from a Visual LANSA program and vice versa. And you can execute VLAPs as part of your LANSA Composer business process as well.
That's great. Thanks very much, Eugene. I think that's all the questions for now. So it just remains for me to point out our contact information, which is on the screen. Eugene and my email addresses are there. But if you'd like to contact your local sales representative in any of our regions to discuss the promotion, please do so. Their names and telephone numbers are available for you on screen. So it just remains for me to thank you all very much for joining us today on the webinar. We hope you found it useful. We'll follow up with each of you after the session. But in the meantime, thanks very much for your time today. We look forward to talking to you soon. Many thanks.